procedural due process and how procedural due process is found in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. We started talking about the 4th Amendment, which has to do with search and seizure, or unlawful search and seizure. The police have to have probable cause, which is suspicion of wrongdoing based on evidence, or a judge's permission before they can legally search you, your car, your residence, your property. Although, if you are actively involved in a criminal, behavior, they are more than welcome to have permission to search you. All right. So if you're caught like literally in the act of doing something, so if like they see you smoking marijuana, they have the right to search you for marijuana. Okay. So, and there's some cases that allow for this, like Wren versus the United States. This was a case that happened in 1996, so it's a more recent one. And this man was pulled over by the police because he did not use his turn signal when he changed lanes. All right? Is that a major offense?
No.
Absolutely not. That is like the most minor of traffic violations. However, you have to use your signal when you change lanes, and so he gets pulled over. And when he did, the police, through the course of a traffic stop, discovered drugs in the front seat of his car. It was just there. All right. So the case goes to trial, and what Wren's defense tried to argue is that the police stopped him arbitrarily for a crime that's not really regularly enforced. Like, have you guys ever been pulled over for not signaling or known anyone? Not really regularly enforced. How many of you guys have, when you're driving, ever changed lanes without signaling?
Aurora, really?
It's okay. I won't tell the police. Okay. It's okay.
It
happens. It happens sometimes, especially like if you're on the interstate late at night or something. There's nobody there.
I'm a turn signal junkie. Like if I could turn signals going around curves, I would.
I only use my turn signal
when you're
when
turning.
I'm calling my sister.
Okay. Well, anyway, Wren had drugs in his car, and when he was pulled over for not signaling, the police found it. And Wren's defense argued that the police stopped him for an arbitrary crime that's not regularly enforced, and so there was no evidence that would give them probable cause to pull him over. And the Supreme Court ruled that the officer's motive for the traffic stop was irrelevant, as long as it was reasonable to stop the car for an infraction that occurred. And through the course of, just looking in the car, not searching, but just in plain sight looking, the police discovered this, then it was upheld. And so it really is a victory for law enforcement in that they have the ability to discover criminal acts through the course of other criminal acts.
But how is now, if a case like this must ever come up again,
Uh-huh.
is there probable cause documented in it? Like, for example, like say I'm pulled over for a certain thing, but there's no real probable cause. Can they just make up a probable cause and get away with it? Or?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just making.
Yes. I had a sociology professor, and she called it DWB, driving while black, and they would just find something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's sad, but we're going to talk about that later. Okay. So moving right along, talk about this thing called the exclusionary rule. Exclusionary rule. If you've ever watched Law and Order, I'm sure you've seen the exclusionary rule on there. This is where evidence that is obtained unconstitutionally is not allowed to be used in court. Okay? So if you're searched illegally, if things are taken from you illegally, if you are monitored illegally, or if you have a confession or something that's coerced, none of those things can be used against you in court. And the reason for that is because of the exclusionary rule. It would be excluded from being used against you. So, a good example of the exclusionary rule put into practice happens in 1961 in Mapp versus Ohio. A woman named Dalree Mapp was having her home searched by the Cleveland Police Department. Now, they were trying to find somebody. They thought that Dalree was harboring a fugitive of the law. And so they had a warrant to search for that person. They did not find the person, but they found pornographic material in a trunk in the basement. Now, at that time, it was not allowable to own pornographic material in that amount by the laws of the city of Cleveland. So she was arrested for possession of obscene materials. And Mapp was convicted on the charge of possession of obscene materials, pornography. And she appeals on the basis that, this evidence was not obtained constitutionally. You were in my home looking for a suspect, and you just happened to find pornographic materials. And the Supreme Court overturned her conviction on the basis that she had been subjected to an unreasonable search and seizure.
So is this when something's ruled inadmissible?
Mm-hmm. Yes, inadmissible is definitely the exclusionary rule.
So, like, for example, if somebody admits, so I'm just curious, like, if somebody admits to something, like, for example, we're in an interrogation room, you're interrogating me,
Yes.
and you coerce me to confess to something I didn't do, would that be ruled inadmissible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I could not be like, be pulling your fingernails out, trying to get a confession out of you, and then get the confession, and then have that administered in the court. That's unconstitutional because according to the exclusionary rule, that's an illegal interrogation, and that's not allowed.
So she appealed the conviction, and they upheld her.
They overturned her
They
conviction.
overturned the
That's
conviction.
what this happened. Okay. All right. So, what happens when you're arrested? Do they just come and pick you up and throw you in the clink? Well, when you're arrested, you still have rights. In fact, you have lots of rights. And you have those rights until you are proven guilty. You are innocent until proven guilty. And that is a saying that we kind of take for granted. But innocent until proven guilty was created by the Romans long, long time ago. And it is part of the backbone of our American judicial system. All right? So, one example of innocent until proven guilty has to do with a case that occurred called Gideon versus Wainwright. Gideon versus Wainwright in 1963. In Gideon versus Wainwright, this is Gideon right here, this elderly gentleman. Basically, the Supreme Court, in this decision, the Supreme Court requires that the states had to furnish an attorney for poor defendants in all felony cases. Not misdemeanors, but major crimes, you are entitled to a free representation, free attorney, free lawyer. Clarence Gideon was just kind of the homeless drifter. He didn't have a job. He just kind of floated around from town to town. He's like just a nomad. And one evening, Clarence thought it would be prudent to break into a pool hall to steal money. And he was caught. All right? He was caught red-handed. And he basically sent through the system and was never offered an attorney. And he appealed his decision on the grounds that he had been denied procedural due process because he was not represented by an attorney. I mean, he was just caught red-handed and just pushed right through. So he appealed, and the Supreme Court overturned his conviction on the case that he was not appropriately represented. And you have the right to an attorney. in all felony cases. All right, like when Aurora gets pulled over for not turning her blinker on, and she goes to traffic court, they're not going to give you an attorney. Only in felony cases. All right, and I'm sure you'll use your blinker. All right, so and that's just one of many Supreme Court cases that has occurred to help define the rights of an individual once you get arrested. Okay, you guys know your rights. You've heard them 1,000 times on television. You have the right to remain silent, and I recommend that you exercise that right. You don't have to say a word. Once your rights are read to you, do not speak. The only thing you need to say is, "I'd like to speak to my attorney." That's it. Don't say anything else. I highly recommend and it's your right to do so. Okay, you can't be compelled to testify against yourself. You don't have to say a word ever, even in court. You do not have to go and say a word. It is on the burden of proof lies on the prosecution. They have to prove you guilty. You don't have to prove your innocence. They have to prove you guilty. Okay, so that's where the burden of proof lies. For Gideon versus Wainwright, you have the right to legal counsel in felony cases. If someone is witnessing against you, you have the right to ask them questions and confront them in front of a jury. You cannot be tried for the same crime twice. That's called double jeopardy, and you cannot be tried for the same crime twice. Now, I'm not talking like, I murder somebody and then I found innocent, and then I murder somebody completely different. That's not what I'm talking about. Like, if I'm found innocent, if I'm found not guilty of murdering someone, and then later on they try to try me again for that same crime, that same murder, that can't happen.
What if they tweak the charge?
Huh?
What if they tweak the charge? Like, for example, if you are charged for murder and you're found innocent.
Well, you see, they might charge me for first-degree murder and then charge me for second-degree.
Now that is okay?
What if they found more evidence?
Depends on what judge you get.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
What if
Like
they
if
couldn't find the girl or somebody that got murdered and they find her?
If O.J. Simpson came out right now and was like, "I murdered them, sorry," like, I'm
How do you
sorry.
know I was just about to mention him? Because didn't he have like civil and a criminal?
He did.
trial? Now is that okay? To
Yeah.
have, like, he can be found civilly liable for.
For example, the President of the United States, former President Donald Trump, he's going to have some civil lawsuits brought against him for the deaths of people during the riots. Okay? It's going to happen. There may not be any criminal things brought against the president, former president, but there will be some civil, and he's probably going to have to settle with some money because people lost their lives as a result of what happened. Whether it was his fault or not, there will be cases. There will be cases. Okay? So, you can confront witnesses. You have the right to a speedy trial. Now, your idea of a speedy trial and the government's idea of a speedy trial are probably different. Like, hey, I want my trial tomorrow. That's not going to happen. Probably a month or so, that would be considered a speedy trial. All right? No double jeopardy. And all of these things are wrapped up concerning your rights in there. And we have a case that happened called Miranda versus Arizona.
I was wondering if those were the Miranda rights.
They are called the Miranda rights for a reason, because of the Miranda versus Arizona in 1966. In Miranda versus Arizona, Ernesto Miranda, he confessed to several crimes, including kidnapping and rape. Not a very good man, Ernesto. But he confessed. Yeah, I did it. Later, after he was convicted of kidnapping and rape, he appealed on the basis that he was not made aware of his rights. That nobody told him what his rights were. And so therefore, this rapist and kidnapper was set free. Yeah. This is why, whenever you are arrested, a police officer carries in their shirt pocket where your rights are, and they have to read it to you. And they call that being Mirandized, or reading you your Miranda warning, or your Miranda rights. They named it after this Supreme Court case in an effort to prevent anyone from ever, being set free after being convicted of such horrible crimes. Imagine the victims of that. Somebody kidnapped and raped you, and then they're set free because nobody told them they didn't have to confess.
Imagine being a cop that didn't read off.
Yes. Yes, it was ugly. It was ugly in 1966. So he was convicted, but later was overturned as he was not made aware of his right to remain silent. So from there on after, police officers were required to read citizens that have been accused of crimes their Miranda warning or Miranda rights. Okay? I think I mentioned this, you have the right to an attorney in felony cases. You can't be compelled to testify against yourself. This is like, you've ever heard anybody say, I plead the fifth? Okay, like, let's say, let me get a drink here, that Aurora is out and she's just out and about minding her own business. Not turning on her turn signal. And she sees Nick murder somebody. Okay? But the reason why Aurora was out and sees Nick murder somebody is because she was selling drugs. Okay? Now, so she has been called to testify on behalf of the prosecution against Nick. Okay? And so when it's Nick's right to confront you because it's Nick's right to confront you because you're testifying against him. All right. Now, you also have the right, you don't have to testify against yourself because Nick's lawyers are going to be like, okay, so Miss Aurora, what were you doing on the night in question when you allegedly saw the defendant commit this crime? Well, if she says, well, I was, peddling smack, she's going to jail because she, on oath, she has confessed to a crime. Well, she's not the one on trial, and she doesn't have to testify herself just like Nick doesn't. And so she can say, I plead the fifth. All right? And that's your right. Now, usually when you're pleading the fifth, you've probably done something wrong. However, you do not have to self-incriminate because if you've done something wrong, it's the job of the government to convict you, not the job of you to confess to it. All right? Those are your legal protections as a citizen of a human. As a human, all humans in America have this. Okay?
I'm just curious. This is very not related, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Are illegal immigrants considered
They are.
part of the Constitution or part of the rights?
Correct.
Okay.
Except for maybe certain parts where there's laws restricting, like gun ownership. But yeah.
So they're entitled to the process, stuff like that.
Yes, they are.
I had a feeling they would.
Yes, they are. Okay. So that's the Fifth Amendment. We mentioned you have the right to remain silent, even if you don't have the ability. And I highly recommend that you use this right. You don't have to say a word. Do not speak. I mean, you can tell the police your name, but you don't have to say a word. You have the right to confront witnesses who testify against you. So we mentioned that. We talked about a speedy trial. That's the Sixth Amendment. Here's Miranda versus Arizona. There he is. There's Ernesto. Arrested and interrogated, and he himself was not even an American citizen, a Mexican immigrant. So, and he still has the same rights. So that answers your question. All right. Last little bit for today here. Habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. Have you ever heard this term, habeas corpus?
Lincoln suspended it during the Civil War.
He did. There you go.
Yeah, I was going to say.
All right. It's Latin, and it's what it translates to in English is you may have the body. You may have the body. So like back in the day, in the medieval times, I guess, maybe even before, whenever a person was accused of a crime, they would be just kind of put in a dungeon or a prison until they were going to have a trial. Well, in those days, there was no such thing as a speedy trial. If the king wanted you just locked up before your trial, you could be locked up indefinitely. Say, okay, yeah, you can have your trial in 25 years. And so sometimes you would literally die in prison waiting for your trial. And so whenever you would die and they would come pick up your body, they would say, hey, you may have the body, habeas corpus. And so we've kind of taken that, and it's kind of tongue in cheek, like it's just your right to a trial. Like you're not going to be put in prison for 30 years waiting for your trial. Okay? So habeas corpus is the right, the access to a trial. And, your civil liberties can be infringed upon if your right to a trial is suspended, like Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War. If you were suspected of being a Southern criminal, or a Southern spy or a Southern sympathizer, he would lock you up without a trial and just detain you against your will. Okay? So they would have no access to the courts. They would just be kept away. So when Lincoln suspends habeas corpus, he takes away people's right to a trial, and people will just have to wait. If it is suspended, then you could be detained forever. It has been suspended on occasion in America, like during the Civil War, and more recently, if you were suspected of terrorist activity, you could be taken to a military base in Cuba and held against your will there for an indefinite amount of time without access to a trial, called Guantanamo Bay. Okay, so questions on your procedural due process rights, habeas corpus, a lot of legal stuff today. But good to know if ever you're arrested, which I don't anticipate will ever happen to any of you.
Except when I become president, I will make a law that says you must use terms.
Well, it is the law.
And well, if you don't,
You make it a
follow the law,
felony.
habeas corpus, I'll suspend it.
That's like saying you stop at every stop sign.
I do stop at every stop sign. Actually, no, that's probably not true.
Mm-hmm.
I yield. According to my mom.
You guys have questions before I'm going to turn the recording off?
According to mom, I yield at
Okay.
stop signs.
If you guys at home have anything, let me know.